The gavel struck with a thud like thunder, shaking through the chamber with a force that hushed the murmurs and froze all motion in the room. Bam! It wasn't just the beginning of a trial, it was the crack of years of secrets bursting open beneath the burden of truth. The courtroom was filled to capacity, each bench taken up by spectators, journalists writing in earnest, and cameras popping like lightning. Satellite vans buzzed and microphones extended heavenward outside, the world's gaze fixed upon a family who had once taught their followers about harmony and now stood broken before the courts. Kody Brown, the center of it all, sat rigidly in his chair, his fingers folded tightly, his jaw set as if anticipating a storm. His gaze swept the room, moving face to face, faces once referred to as family, now set in lines of betrayal. Seated opposite him was Meri, her frame tense, her lips pursed into a thin, merciless line. Years of allegiance, years of swallowing pride, now distilled into something bitter. Next to her was Christine, fidgeting uncomfortably, tears on the verge but not yet spilling. Janelle sat beside, her expression revealing nothing but her hands drumming with paper held tightly under her arm. And then Robyn, nearest to Kody among the others, sitting alongside him, holding his arm like she could moor him to something real. But even she could not conceal the shake in her hand, the terror dancing in her eyes. The prosecutor stood up, a gaunt man with a voice that had the weight of steel ringing through the chamber. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he started, his voice crisp, each word cutting through the silence, "this is not a trial of faith. This is not a trial of polygamy. This is a trial of deception, of betrayal, of money diverted away while trust was breached." He paused, allowing the words to linger in the thick air. "You will view the evidence, you will listen to the testimony, and you will realize that Mr. Brown, this individual sitting here before you, betrayed the very family he professed to lead." A murmur of gossip flowed through the gallery, journalists taking down notes, the whispers jumping from lip to lip. Kody inclined his head a fraction toward his attorney, who patted his shoulder, talking softly in reassurance. But his mouth trembled at the corners, revealing a flash of anxiety. The wives kept quiet, their eyes fixed forward, refusing even to glance in his direction. The judge herself was stern and immovable, leaning forward. "Order," she said in a flat, commanding voice. The room subsided into strained silence once more, the only noise the faint scratch of pens across paper. Beyond the courtroom doors, shouts and chants from masses gathered on the steps. Fans and detractors alike had flooded in waves, carrying signs, waving placards, some rallying to Kody's defense of his way of life, others calling for justice on behalf of the women they perceived as victims of control and deception. Within, though, there was no sound from the world outside, only the suffocating weight of betrayal laid bare for all to hear. The prosecutor went on, pacing slowly in front of the jury. For years this man posed as the doting patriarch of a big, odd family. He talked of togetherness, of love, of sacrifice. But in the privacy of his own home behind the beaming on TV, there were secrets, secret bank accounts, broken vows, money diverted to suit his own needs, while his wives took everything he said at face value. His tone hardened. "This trial is not about belief. It's not about lifestyle. It's about fraud." The words cut like a slap, and Christine closed her eyes, her chest heaving with tight gasps for air. Janelle leaned forward toward Meri, whispering something barely audible. Meri didn't react. She just sat, hands fisted in her lap, nails biting into her palms, as if pain alone was what kept her from toppling over. Reporters beyond the ropes of the press box strained forward, cameras focused on each twitch, each tear, each suggestion of emotion. They understood that the drama unspooling was not merely legal. It was highly personal, a saga millions of watchers had watched for years, now spilling out under oath. Kody's attorney stood up at last, a compact man with slicked hair and a voice that bore an air of serene confidence. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, folding his hands together, "what you are about to hear is not a case of fraud, nor of betrayal. It is the tale of a fractured family, a family whose internal conflict has been brought out into the spotlight. These wives, these women are offended. They are upset, and in their upset, they wish to punish the man who once attempted to keep them together. But indignation does not render a man guilty. Shattered relationships do not render financial crime. The attorney moved her hand toward Kody, who nodded once, chest out as if drawing strength once more. You will be shown the truth, and when you see it, you will know that Mr. Brown is not a thief. He is not a liar. He is merely a man in the tempest of resentment. The gallery hummed again, the chatter of conflicting opinions in the air. Some believed the wives, their raw emotions certain. Others questioned whether this was all about revenge. Years of sorrow armed into a battle of the law. The judge's gavel fell once more. Bam! The noise echoed, rattling the still air. There will be no outbursts, she warned. We will hear the evidence. Kody moved in his chair, his hands drumming inside the wooden table. For the first time his gaze darted to Christine, then Meri, then Janelle. They didn't glance back. Their silence was deafening, better than any accusation. Even Robyn, who sat beside him, drew her hand back slightly, as if wondering whether she could continue to hold on. The prosecutor took another step forward, his voice again echoing one final time for the opening session. When the truth is revealed, there will be no doubt. The evidence will shout louder than words. And when it does, you will know Kody Brown for what he truly is, a man who betrayed his own family. The words hung, weights as stone. The wives remained motionless, each her own tempest of feelings. The jury looked between them and Kody, already measuring faces, words and quiet. Outside, the cries echoed louder, the tempest battering against the courthouse walls, and when the judge called the first witness, the courtroom was breathless. The fight for the truth was just starting, and the Fishers in the Brown family were soon to open wide. The fluorescent lights in the courtroom felt more glaring as the second day's session commenced, casting an unblinking gaze upon all like a teller of secrets. Tension was in every breath. The jurors returned, their expressions impassive but watchful, their glances darting toward the prosecution table, where files piled high and a bright screen waited. The judge nodded curtly, prompting the prosecutor to proceed. He stood up with assurance, a folder in his hand, and a certain pride in his eyes that threatened to alter the room forever. Ladies and gentlemen, he started, holding aloft a thin stack of papers. This is where it stops being about bad promises and begins being about hard facts. He took a step forward, every step resounding in the chamber. He pulled out the first sheet of paper from the folder, then nodded to the clerk who wheeled a monitor over to the jury. In less than 10 seconds, figures appeared on the screen. Bank statements, transfers, deposits, years' worth of records. The prosecutor drummed his finger against the first page. This here marks the start of the fraud. A murmur passed through the gallery. Reporters leaned over their notebooks, pens scratching in furious crescendo. Christine's hand snapped up to her mouth, shoulders quivering. Meri sat up straighter, lips compressing into a thinner line, eyes never leaving the screen. Janelle leaned in, her brows furrowing, as if confirming figures she had already suspected for years. Robyn, on the other hand, fidgeted uncomfortably in her seat next to Kody, her hold on his arm relaxing just enough to be picked up by cameras. These accounts, the prosecutor went on, his voice calm, were secreted away. Money intended for family maintenance, intended for projects shared by the family such as the notorious Coyote Pass land, were secretly channeled here into private accounts with Mr. Brown's name on them. He paused, surveying the jury, allowing the words to settle as heavy dust in their minds. And these accounts, he clicked again, showing further numbers, never made the records presented to his wives. The courtroom was filled with whispers. The judge banged her gavel. Bam! Order! She yelled. The noise silenced the muttering, but the tension still hung in the air. Reporters quietly whispered into recorders, already writing tomorrow's headlines. Hidden accounts exposed in Brown trial. Christine couldn't contain herself. She let her tears flow freely, streaming down her cheeks as she whispered roughly, I knew it, I knew it. Janelle extended her hand, but Christine jerked away, her gaze still fixed on Kody. "You lied to us," she mouthed, shaking her head slowly. Kody clenched his jaw, his fists clenching against the smooth wood of the table. His lawyer craned forward, whispering urgently, but his face still flushed, the cracks in his facade deepening. Robyn leaned forward, but he did not look at her. The prosecutor sensed the turn and pushed harder. "Let us not forget," he said, raising another piece of paper. "This wasn't pocket change. We are talking about thousands upon thousands of dollars. Money plundered over the course of years, cleverly hidden. While his wives were being informed there wasn't enough to cover bills, enough to construct their promised homes, enough to provide their children's futures. Mr. Brown was securing his own." One juror scribbled a note, another leaned back, arms crossed, lips pursed in thought. The impact was undeniable. The story was no longer just about disappointment or heartbreak. It was about betrayal quantified in black and white numbers. The prosecutor then produced a sequence of magnified checks. "Take a good look," he said, distributing copies to the bailiff, who passed them to the jury. These checks, written to accounts his wives never even knew he had, were signed by Mr. Brown himself. He spoke just a little louder, emphasizing the point. Fraud in his own handwriting. The room fell silent. Even the clicking of reporters' cameras paused for a beat. The wives stared, their faces a mixture of vindication and devastation. Christine turned to Meri, whispering, "He can't deny this now." Meri, stone-faced, didn't respond, but her clenched jaw said everything. Robyn, however, finally spoke, her voice barely audible. "Kody, tell them it's not true." Her whisper carried just far enough for the microphones to catch, and the jury's eyes flicked toward her. Kody didn't answer. His silence screamed louder than any denial could. The prosecutor walked back to the jury box, eyes piercing and unyielding. "This isn't about misunderstandings. This isn't about a choice of lifestyle. This is about willful, sustained deceit. Mr. Brown's family sacrificed, trusted, and relied on him. And he pointed a finger at Kody, betrayed that trust for personal gain." The judge looked down at her papers, then back out into the courtroom. "We will continue with testimony shortly," she announced, but her voice gave away her own acknowledgement of the gravity of what had just transpired. The ensuing silence was crushing. The jurors shifted awkwardly, each one grappling with the mountain of evidence now firmly lodged in their laps. The gallery hummed once more, whispers spilling up like white noise. Kody finally spoke up. His tone was low, restrained, but tremulous at the margins. "This is sick," he growled, his gaze leaping between the jury box and the prosecutor. "They don't see how we lived. They don't see what I sacrificed. This isn't stealing, it's leadership." The prosecutor wheeled around, seizing on his words. "Leadership?" he repeated, his tone laced with acid incredulity. "Leadership is leading your family honestly. Leadership is not secretly draining accounts. Leadership is not creating an empire upon deceit." His words struck like punches, each one another twist in the noose around Kody's defense. Journalists wrote frantically. Meri moved forward, her voice barely above a whisper, but her words blazing. "We hear enough, Kody." The judge's gavel came down again. Bam! "Order!" she ordered again, her voice a little more forceful this time. The courtroom fell silent, although the atmosphere still hung thick with unspoken feeling. Kody slumped slightly in his chair, his bravado dimming, though his lawyer placed a hand on his shoulder and whispered, "We'll fight this. Don't show weakness." But weakness was already bleeding through, visible in the way his eyes avoided the jury, in the way Robyn's hand hovered but no longer held his. The prosecutor, who could smell a win, gathered his files and wrapped up, "This is just the beginning. Over the coming days, you will hear from the women who placed their trust in him, from experts who examined these stories, and even from those who are nearest to him who can no longer hold their peace. By the time this trial reaches its end, you will behold in full the extent of Mr. Brown's betrayal, and justice will command accountability." As he took his seat, the burden of his words hung on the air like storm clouds. The judge struck a brief recess, the gavel falling once again. At once, the room was filled with noise. Reporters scrambling out the doors, cameras snapping, whispers filling the air like a cloud. The wives rose slowly, each lost in their own storm of feelings. Christine's tears refused to cease. Meri moved stiffly, head held high, rage burning. Janelle gripped her papers harder, lips pursed in determination. And Kody? He remained seated, slumped shoulders, eyes fixed on the documents laid out in front of him. Robyn edged in closer, barely above a whisper, but he didn't react. For the first time, the man who had based his life on control appeared like a cornered animal, the walls closing, his kingdom tumbling under the force of reality. The second session ended not with a bang, but with the stifling silence of a family disintegrating, its secrets no longer hidden behind closed doors, but exposed for all the world to know. The room was still vibrating from the aftershocks of the evidence brought forward by the prosecution when the defense finally rose. The tension was so thick it weighed on shoulders, made every breath feel heavy. The prosecutor had worked to portray Kody as a traitor, a man who stole from his own wives, and the jury was already leaning forward, eyes narrowed, pens scratching out notes. It was the defense's turn now, and they had to change the direction before it carried Kody away entirely. Kody's lawyer smoothed out his suit, buttoning the jacket slowly, surely as if commanding attention just by doing it slowly. He strode to the middle of the room, hands folded, voice even and measured. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he started, his tone exuding a serenity that was jarringly at odds with the incendiary charges that they had just been told. "We should not let passion substitute for truth. This is not a fraud case. This is not an issue of hidden crimes. This is a matter of a family disintegrating, a matter of bitterness, injured feelings and heartbreak. And it is a matter where individual pain has been distorted into charges of money dishonesty." The jury leaned in their seats, intently listening. Some members furrowed their brows, weighing his line of reasoning. The attorney went on, his hand sweeping softly over toward Kody. "My client, Mr. Brown, is not a thief. He is not a liar. He is a man who grew up in a dysfunctional family, a man who attempted to guide 4 marriages, dozens of children, and the mayhem that accompanied such a responsibility. He did what he believed was right, even when it was not popular. And now, because those unions have dissolved, because old injuries have been reopened, he is being brought here to be punished not for deception, but for sorrow." Christine's face went red. She said something harshly under her breath to Janelle, whom she tried to quiet, but the jury saw her fury. The attorney noted this, and struck the point further. "The women you will hear from are not unbiased. They are not victims of financial devastation. They are ex-wives, upset, bitter and bent on punishing the man they feel hurt them emotionally. But members of the jury, being a lousy husband is not against the law. Divorce, separation, disillusionment, none of these constitute financial fraud." He stopped, striding deliberately, allowing the words to linger. "Let's discuss those accounts," he said, turning again to the evidence laid out before. "The prosecution has presented to you figures, impersonal cold figures. But figures without context are not a story. Did Mr. Brown have accounts in his own name? Yes. But is that typical for the head of a large family with several households, properties and commitments? Absolutely not. These were not secret offshore accounts stashed away from scrutiny. These were business accounts. For bills, projects and expenses. The wives hadn't necessarily documented every day. We will demonstrate to you specifically where that money was spent. And you will see, there was no dishonesty, only mess and miscommunication." Newspaper reporters leaned forward once more, writing down every word. Kody's attorney was trying to demolish the incriminating image, brick by brick. Christine rolled her eyes, mouthing lies, but the jury wasn't unaware of her resentment. Meri folded her arms tightly, her body rigid with defiance. Janelle sat quietly but warily, like one who knew that this argument was scripted, waiting to be picked apart. Robyn brightened a little, relief dancing in her eyes, as though grasping hold of the words spoken. The attorney gestured at the wives then, his tone growing bitter. "Ask yourselves this. Why now? Why raise this now? After all these years of living this way together, why charge him now with offenses that allegedly took a decade to commit? Because the family has broken. Because feelings are high. Because anger obscures sense. They are not here for justice. They are here for vengeance. A wave of noise coursed through the gallery. The attorney held up his hand, his voice dropping in pitch, nearly conspiratorial. And let me remind you, the law is not about resolution of personal scores. The law is about facts, and the facts will demonstrate that these allegations are spawned not of truth, but of suffering. Kody raised his chin a fraction, his gaze flicking towards the jury. For the first time in as long as the trial had run, he seemed less like a man trapped, and more like a person summoning up the courage to think that he still had soil to stand on. His attorney's words had provided him with that fleeting moment of confidence, and he held on to it for dear life. The prosecutor scowled, writing furiously. He recognized the defense was striking at the emotions of the wives, portraying them as vindictive, instead of telling the truth. It was an attempt to influence the jury's perception, translate raw agony into dubious bias. The defense attorney continued, now pacing in front of the jury with deliberate slowness. Meri may tell you she feels betrayed. Christine may tell you her dreams of Coyote Pass were broken. Janelle may bring her spreadsheets. But at the end of the day, none of this proves criminal intent. It proves they are disappointed. It proves they are angry. But disappointment does not equal guilt. Anger does not equal fraud. Meri's eyes blazed as she leaned toward Christine. He's twisting it, she hissed. Christine nodded fiercely. Janelle, calm as ever, whispered, let him talk. It won't matter when the truth comes. The attorney took another step closer to the jury, his voice relaxing. You will also hear from Mr. Brown himself. You will hear his version of events, and you will realize that he is not the demon they portray him to be. He is an imperfect man. I admit it, but he is not a criminal. He faced back to the judge. The defense rests its opening for now. With a nod, he sat down at the table, putting a hand on Kody's shoulder. Kody let out a deep breath, his chest expanding as if a burden had been removed. Robyn leaned close, whispering words of encouragement, and for an instant the fissures in his armor appeared sealed. But across the courtroom, Christine was trembling with rage. Meri's eyes were steel, and Janelle tightened her grip on her papers. They knew the defense had landed some blows, but they were ready to fight back. The judge struck her gavel, announcing the shift. The jury was still calm, but their gaze was a little more acute now, and it looked not only at evidence but at the fire smoldering on both sides. No longer was the trial merely a case. It was a battle of perception, a war of words against agony, defense against deceit. As the recess for the day was called, reporters sprinted for the doors, yelling into cameras. The defense strikes back, painting wives as revengeful, not truthful. Outside, the crowd roared louder, divided between shouts for justice and wails of support for Kody. Within, as Kody relaxed into his chair with a thin smile, Christine glanced over at Meri and whispered, he thinks he's winning. But wait, we've yet to show them everything. And with that, the storm was gearing up for the next blow. The lines of conflict drawn deeper, the stakes rising higher with each word that fell. The air was charged when the clerk called the next witness. All eyes in the room shifted toward the doors along the side of the courtroom. A stir spread through the gallery as Daniel emerged, shoulders set, his fresh face white in the blinding light. He bore no resemblance to the boy who had lived in the shadow of his father's well-spun persona. He appeared like a person with a burden too heavy for his age, one that made each step towards the witness stand feel like it was through fire. Journalists raised their cameras at once, waiting for the moment to capture it. The judge shifted her glasses, her tone even but with an undertone of curiosity. Please say your name for the record. Daniel Brown, he whispered, his voice breaking in the microphone. He coughed and said louder, Daniel Brown. The prosecutor smiled reassuringly, advancing slowly, tenderly as toward a scared bird that could fly at the first loud noise. Daniel, he started, I know this is hard, but you are here to speak the truth. And that truth is more important than anything. Do you get it? Daniel nodded, his gaze flashing briefly toward Kody at the defense table. For the first time, the great patriarch didn't seem solid. His face was white, his jaw locked and his hands clasped together as if merely holding himself together. Robyn leaned in, whispering intensely, you don't have to do this, Daniel, but her words didn't travel far enough. Daniel had already set his gaze on the prosecutor, his determination growing like a flame fueled by years of silence. The prosecutor placed a folder in his hands. Daniel, I want you to examine these documents. Do you know them? Daniel scanned the pages. Bank transfers, signatures, printouts of emails. He hesitated, swallowing. Yes, he whispered. The prosecutor leaned in. And why do you know them? Daniel's voice shook, but he pushed the words past his lips. Because Dad asked me to transfer the money. He said it was just so that everything was secure. He said if anyone questioned me, that I should explain that it was for business. The courtroom was filled with commotion. People gasped, reporters almost standing on their feet. The judge bashed the gavel. Bam! Order, order in this court. But even the crack of the gavel could not quell the electricity now filling the room. Christine's face contorted, tears openly streaming as she clasped her hands over her mouth. Meri leaned forward, her head shaking in denial, her eyes locked on Kody as if challenging him to deny it. Janelle sat back, her eyes closed, her lips moving soundlessly as if a prayer heard at last. Robyn gripped Kody's arm with both her hands, her body shaking. No, she breathed. He wouldn't. The prosecutor's tone grew sharp. Daniel, are you saying to this court that your father instructed you to assist in covering up funds and accounts in your name? Daniel nodded hesitantly, tears welling in his eyes. I didn't understand what it was. I just did what he wanted. He said, not to tell Mom, not to tell anyone. The stunned silence that followed was oppressive. The jury glared at him, some with mouths open, some frantically writing notes. It was not testimony anymore. It was betrayal bare in the most naked form, a son laying bare the secrets of his father. Kody lost it. Finally, his voice thundering from the defense table. He doesn't know what he's saying. He bellowed, pounding his hand on the wood. Robyn gasped, trying to hush him, but it was too late. The judge's gavel thundered again. Bam! Bam! Mr. Brown, you will control yourself. Kody seethed, his chest heaving, but his lawyer pulled him back into his seat, whispering furiously. The damage was already done. The jury had seen his mask slip. The prosecutor pressed on, steady and relentless. Daniel, did your father ever explain why he was hiding this money? Daniel wiped at his eyes. He said it wasn't anyone else's business. He said the others wouldn't understand, that it was better if they never knew. Gasps echoed once more. Christine breathed softly. I knew. I always knew. Meri's eyes shone, though her expression remained set. Janelle sat frozen, listening to each word with stunned focus. The prosecutor leaned in. Daniel, why are you saying this now? Daniel paused, then his voice cracked. Because I couldn't lie anymore. I couldn't pretend anymore. It's ruined everything. I thought he was keeping us safe, but he wasn't. He was keeping himself safe. His shoulders trembled as tears streamed down his face. The courtroom was caught in time, every single one of them watching the boy who had kept a secret no child should ever have to keep. The defense lawyer finally stood up, striding quickly to the witness stand. Daniel, he said smoothly, you love your mother, don't you? Daniel was confused. Yes. The lawyer nodded. And you've heard her anger, her bitterness towards your father. Daniel furrowed his brow. Yes. The lawyer's tone turned more biting. And you want to protect her, don't you? Isn't it possible, Daniel, that your memory has been shaped by her tales, by her anger? Daniel shook his head hard. No. I recall what he said. I recall signing documents. I recall keeping it a secret. His voice trembled but remained strong. She did not say that to me. He did. The attorney attempted again, moving in a circle. You were young, perhaps confused. Perhaps you misheard. Daniel's eyes flashed, anger taking the place of fear. I wasn't confused. I did what he instructed me to do. I remember everything. His voice grew louder, so loud that it seemed to resound. He had me lie to my family. The gallery exploded once more. The gavel of the judge boomed for quiet. Reporters muttered hysterically. The son rebels against the father. Brown family breaks on the stand. Kody sat rigidly, his face red with anger, his attorney holding onto his arm to restrain him from blowing up once more. Robyn went white, tears streaming down her face as she mouthed prayers silently to herself. Meri, Christine, and Janelle sat as if a decision had already been made in their hearts. Their gazes followed Daniel, not in anger, but in pride and sadness. He had shattered the silence in which they had lived for so long. The prosecutor's last question hit hard. Daniel, if your dad were sitting here, what would you tell him? Daniel set his eyes squarely on Kody for the first time. His voice trembled but was unambiguous. I'd tell him you said to lie. You said family was about trust, but you never trusted us. You manipulated us, and I can't keep it inside anymore. The words cut like knives, slicing through the silence that followed. Kody's face contorted, rage and despair wrestling in his eyes. Robyn grabbed his arm, pleading desperately, but he didn't budge. The jury watched. The gallery hummed and the judge's gavel at last concluded the session. As Daniel descended, the room hung suspended in shocked silence. Each individual within recognized that they had just seen the moment the trial went irrevocably in a different direction. The son's confession had shattered the final line of defense. The family was no longer divided. It was shattered, and the fragments were strewn about for the entire world to witness. The judge's gavel cracked one last time, as she adjourned the witness stand, and the silence left in the wake of Daniel's confession still lingered heavily in the air. The gallery hummed like a hive of disturbed bees. Journalists hushed over recorders, drawing headlines in anticipation of the verdict before they even heard it. The wives were spread out, each her own whirlwind of feelings. Christine scrubbing her cheeks raw with tears. Meri quiet but unyielding. Janelle gazing down at her notes with determined serenity. And Robyn holding on to Kody's arm as though her hold could anchor him from falling apart entirely. The prosecutor and defense had spoken their piece. Now it was no longer their decision. It was time for the jury to make up their minds. The bailiff's loud and authoritative voice boomed through the room, as the jury filed out through the side door into the jury room. 4 men and 8 women, eyes cast down, faces expressionless, walked out. The big door closed behind them. And in that instant the courtroom became a choking quiet. It was one more oppressive than any previous, one that pressed upon the chest and made every breath a struggle. Everyone understood that what transpired next would alter the Brown family forever. The jury room itself was a world apart. No cameras, no reporters, just 12 citizens with the task of dissecting weeks of pain and betrayal. The foreman, a middle-aged man, with glasses perched low on his nose, cleared his throat. "All right," he said, his voice steady but firm. "We need to talk through this carefully. No shouting, no rushing. We're not here to punish feelings. We're here to weigh facts." A woman at the table to our left was the first to speak, her voice harsh. The testimony of the son was terrible. You could tell he was distraught. Why would he make up a story like that? He had nothing to lose. A number of jurors nodded in concurrence. Another man leaned forward, his pen tapping. But the defense did get it right. This is an angry family feud. Perhaps the boy's recollection was tainted by his mother. Emotions run high in divorces. That doesn't mean it was fraud. The arguments started making rounds of the table like vultures. A juror brought the bank statements nearer, leafing through them. The figures don't lie. Transfers, checks, deposits, all in his name. The wives never received them. That's fraud. Another argued, but fraud does not necessarily equal to crime. He was running several households. Perhaps he was careless, but that does not necessarily mean that he was stealing. In the courtroom meanwhile, the mood was no less strained. Reporters leaned in, whispers crossed lips, cameras twirling in for every jerk of Kody's expression. He had his head down, jaw clenched, lips going slowly as if praying or practicing what he'd tell them if the jury rendered verdict against him. Robyn was whispering angrily into his ear, her hand rubbing his arm, but his gaze never wavered from the table before him. Over in the other room, Christine had her eyes shut, muttering softly to herself as if praying, while Meri glared fixedly at the jury door, her white-knuckled grip on her tissue threatening to crush it. Janelle sat up straight, a silent strength emanating from her composed presence, although her leg bobbled under the table. Within the jury room, the argument became more intense. "Come on, you can't deny Daniel's confession," one of the men maintained, tapping the table impatiently. He said his father instructed him to transfer the money. He was adamant, and the emails corroborated it. "That's intent." A second juror furrowed his brow. "Intent is difficult. Did the father actually mean to cheat them? Or was it simply him believing he knew better?" "There is a difference." The foreman held up his hand for quiet. Let's have a preliminary vote, not final, just to gauge where we are. They wrote hastily on pieces of paper, pushing them forward. He opened each one, reading out, guilty, guilty, not guilty, guilty, not guilty, guilty. The tally divided, 7 guilty, 5 not guilty. The air thickened, the division sharper. See, one of the holdouts retorted, folding his arms. Almost half of us aren't persuaded. You can't convict a man unless you know beyond a reasonable doubt. That's the law. The woman who had started it off shook her head. And how much more doubt do you need eliminated? His son confessed. His wives all testified. The paper trail proves it. If that's not sufficient, then what is? Hours ticked by at a crawl. Points echoed back and forth. They rewound Daniel's testimony, re-studied the bank records, re-read the emails. Every phrase was picked apart, every digit examined. Foreheads sweated, coffee cups were drained, and there still came no definitive decision. Back in the courtroom, time crawled agonizingly. The wives shifted uncomfortably, glancing at each other but speaking little. Christine finally got up, walking softly in the aisle, wringing her hands. Meri spoke only in a whisper. If he gets out, after it all, what was it all for? Janelle put a soothing hand on her shoulder. We did our part. Now it's in their hands. Robyn hid her face in her hands, praying softly while Kody gazed ahead with the glassy eyes of a man who couldn't make up his mind whether to rage or to break. Finally, a message was brought from the jury room to the judge. She read it, her face inscrutable, and then declared, "The jury asks for more time to deliberate." A body of sighs and discontent circulated through the gallery, and the wives fidgeted. Christine whispered, "They're divided." Kody smiled remotely, grabbing at the glimmer of hope. "They can't come to a consensus," he growled under his breath. The jury deliberated late in the night. The foreman pushed once more. "We have to get closer. Take a look at the facts. Let go of emotions. Facts only." They circled the table once more, every juror voicing their opinion. One who had voted not guilty initially at last admitted, "The son's words haunt me. He didn't sound rehearsed. He sounded shattered, and shattered people are honest." Another nodded. "I keep thinking about the documents. There's too much smoke for there not to be fire." Gradually the balance tipped. Back in the courtroom, night descended outside the windows. The hum of reporters now illuminated by glowing cameras beneath artificial lights. People outside chanted, some shouting for justice, others for Kody, the din trickling weakly into the chamber. Inside, the wives were weary but determined. Meri hadn't shifted her eyes from the jury door for hours. Christine leaned heavily on Janelle, eyes swollen and red. Robyn sat with her head down, quiet now, hand limp in Kody's. At last, around midnight, the bailiff called out that the jury had made a verdict. The room burst into a cacophony before the judge's gavel slammed down, bringing order. The jury came in, their faces somber, their movements measured. The foreman held a crumpled square of paper, his fingers trembling ever so slightly as he handed it to the bailiff, who in turn passed it to the judge. The judge unrolled the paper slowly, her eyes scanning the verdict. The wives leaned forward, breathless. Kody's jaw was clenched, his eyes going from judge to jury. The gallery was quiet, the outside world muffled into a hum. The judge cleared her throat. "Ladies and gentlemen of the court, the jury has reached a verdict." She looked at the foreman, and he nodded gravely. The courtroom leaned forward as a whole. Hearts pounded, breaths were caught, eyes opened wide. And when the judge held the slip of paper up to read, the moment came into focus. The air heavy, the quiet suffocating, the Brown family's destiny hanging by the length of a single word.